Hi, let's continue by talking about how we can get our bike share model to simulate not just 1 minute of time, but a whole sequence of minutes of time. So a whole hour, a whole day, 365 days, etc. To do that, we're going to use a for loop, and I think it's important for us to spend a little bit of time talking about the structure of for loops in Python. Um, to do that well, we first want to introduce another command called the range command. All right, so this range command, it takes, so the range command takes in 1 to 3 inputs and gives as output uh, a list containing a sequence of evenly spaced numbers. Up to, but not including, the last number. Okay, so let me give you the 3 different things that this range command can do. Right, so if we just did range of n, then the output of this is the list that starts out at 0 and it goes up to n minus 1. All right, so for us mathematicians, these are those computer scientists that like to start things at 0 instead of starting at 1. And because of that, there's always going to be this decision about, are we off by 1? What exactly is happening? So whenever we see something that's range of, so as an example, if we did range of 4, those are the numbers 0, 1, 2, 3. There's still 4 numbers, but they're not 1, 2, 3, 4. They're 0, 1, 2, 3. Computer scientists. All right, so range of, maybe we'll call this start and stop. So I said we could have either 1, 2, or 3 inputs. One input gives the numbers from 0 up to that input minus 1. Range of start stop. This starts at start. Then we do start plus 1, dot, 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 and it goes up to stop minus 1. I'm assuming these are integers. If they're not integers, well, I think it's probably a good idea to play with that on your own. See what happens. Try to push these boundaries. What happens if it's from e to pi? Well, take a look. So that's what would happen if we used range between 2 numbers. And the last thing we could have is we could have range where we have a start, we have a stop, but we also have one last thing, an increment. So incr is for increment. All right, in that case, our list looks a little bit like above, right? We start at start, but instead of adding 1, we add the increment. Start plus the increment, start plus the increment, so 2 increments, start plus 3 increments. You keep going up until, let me just not put this, you keep going as long as you don't include stop. So go until you go until the next entry would be stop or greater. So for example, range of 3, 17, comma 4 gives us 3, 3 plus 4 is 7, 7 plus 4 is 11, 11 plus 4 is 15, but 15 plus 4 would be 21, which is bigger than 17. So this is range 3, 17, 4. All right, so that's the range command. And this is going to be useful when we're working with for loops. Let me just copy down what I had before because I think it's going to be useful. Range of 4. Remember we said this is 0, 1, 2, 3. All right, I'm going to keep that in mind as I talk about for loops. All right, so every language has their own way that for loops work. And for loops are used to do repeated tasks. To do repeated tasks. Right, and this is why we have computers. If we don't have to do repeated tasks, we can just do them by hand. But if we're doing things that take, like you want to do something and then do it again and then do it again, this is really what computers are good for. This is really what computers are good for. This is really what computers are good for. All right. Other computer languages, if you've seen them before, you may be used to having like a counter, right? You might do I equals 0, I plus plus. You might take a number that keeps getting larger and larger over time, up until some condition that you specify holds. And each time it will apply, it will do tasks based on what that counter is. So in Python, loops work a bit differently. So in Python, the programmer specifies a list of objects, and the task is performed based on each object. All right, we can use a list of numbers, but the list can be as general as you want. So here's what the syntax looks like. So for variable in list colon, again, we have an indent, perform these tasks. All right, and then for each variable in the list, so this is what the structure looks like, and then for each object in the list, the variable is defined to be the object, and the tasks are performed based on that variable. All right, so let's just give a couple examples of what this could be. So if we do for I in range 4, colon, print I. All right, and so what we do is, so here's then what the for loop does. So the for loop does this. It says, okay, here's our variable, I. We could have called it anything. I choose I because I'm a mathematician. This thing right here, this variable is called an indexing variable. And so that's why I call it I. And mathematicians like to use I to represent the index, and increment a value I. And so let's take the view of what a computer sees. So a computer sees, okay, all right, I is my value, and what are the tasks that I have to do? The tasks that I have to do are print I. Okay, so now I look at what is my list of objects. My list of objects is range 4, which we said are 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I first is 0. Print I. Print 0. I got to the end of my for loop, and so now I choose the next one. So the next one is 1. And then I would do print 1. And then I look at what's the next value. The next value is 2. I look at print 2. I do print 2. And if I look at I is equal to 3, then I do print 3. And now I'm at the end of my list of objects, and so I'm done. Okay, so this is how Python is approaching it. It's looking at a list of things, and it's letting this variable, this indexing variable, represent each of those objects. Let me mark down a couple of things to keep track of here in terms of our list. All right, so notice that in a for loop, we're using these keywords, for and in. And actually, let me change to a different color. So keywords, for and in. So just like an if statement always uses for, or uses if, a for loop always uses for and in. The first line ends with a colon. Right, that's another thing that we saw in Python. Python likes to put a colon at the end of these special, like the if statement here and the for loops here. What else can we say? We've got an indentation. So the body of the loop is indented. So the body of the loop is indented. And this variable is called the indexing variable. So let's use a different color here, maybe blue. This variable, this indexing variable, you don't need to define it beforehand. You don't need to define I beforehand. In C++, for example, you have to say I equals 0. Here you don't have to do that because this variable is just going to take on the values that are in the list. All right. So let's go see this for loop in action. Let's go have the computer calculate this explicitly. So let's head over to our code. So as I mentioned, there's these 3 different ways to keep track of the range. The range starts at n, range start to stop, range start stop increment. And so here's an example of running for I in range of 4, print I. It's going to do exactly what we said. So it's going to take I to be 0, prints out 0. It's going to take I to be 1, it prints out 1. Takes I to be 2, it prints out 2. Takes I to be 3, prints out 3. But just like I said before, the names here, our list doesn't have to be a set of numbers. Instead, it could be, for example, here's a list of names. I've put them in quotes, to let Python know that they are text strings. And so here's 4 different names, and I can get Python to print out the 4 different names using basically the same code as before, for I in names. And we could use I here, but maybe we would say for name in names, print name. Right? So for every name that's in this list, print out the name. And then here it goes. It prints out the 4 different names that are in that list. All right. I think that's enough for now. I'll see you in the next video.